Hey guys, in this module, I've got something a little bit different for you. Now, up till now, we've been working on how to build websites that have great functionality and how to use CSS, HTML to build up the structure of the website. Now, today, I want to talk about something a little bit different, namely how to design websites so that not only does your website have great functionality, but it also looks beautiful. The most important thing to making a website loved by users is pretty much the design. After all, think about it. When was the last time you heard somebody tell you, hey, I came across this great website. It worked really, really well, so smooth and no bugs. Nobody ever says that, right? They say things like, it looked so beautiful. It just worked like I wanted it to. So today we're going to talk about design, and I want to show you some of the different aspects of design when it comes to websites. Now, more often than not, you've heard this saying, right? Don't judge a book by its cover. Now, at the same time, you might have also heard of this saying, you only have 3 seconds to make a good impression. Now, when it comes to web design, the latter is probably more accurate. It's just like a job interview or a first date. Your website has a crucial few seconds before the user is going to judge your company, your brand, your product. So take a look at this example. This is a website called Penny Juice, and it's a company that sells children's juice cartons. Now look at the design of it. There's clashing colors, there's different typefaces, there's different colors for the text, and they have different fonts, and it's all, to be honest, a bit of a mess. So this is a question I often ask students at this point. Take a look at this website and ask yourself, if you were to buy a product from this company, if you were to buy a carton of juice, how much would you pay for it? Now, take a look at this website. This is the same website reimagined by a professional web designer. Look at how the color scheme is now consistent, how the fonts and the typefaces now look a lot better. And ask yourself again, how much would you pay for a single carton of juice from this website? Now, I've asked this question to a number of people, and this is the result I got. People are willing to pay anywhere up to only $1 for a carton of juice from the first website, but anywhere up to $3 for the second website. Now, I run a startup, and a lot of friends and colleagues of mine also work on their own businesses. And we usually spend a lot of time brainstorming, how can we make our product better? How can we make our brand stronger? And there's very, very few things that we can think of that can actually produce a 3 times improvement in the value of your product or in the value of your company. So design is really, really powerful. It's one of the cheapest ways to make your company or your product look expensive because it's elevating, and it doesn't take a lot to get good at design, as you'll see in the coming lessons. So we're going to be exploring some of the principles of web design in this module, and I want to take you through everything from color theory to typography to user interface design and user experience design. These are the 4 pillars of good web design. So once you're ready, head over to the next lesson and let's get started. Now, one of the first things I want to talk about is color theory. And color theory is the art and science of creating the right palette for your website. So take a look at this example. Now, let's say you had a logo where you have flowers, which are brown, paintball, which is pink. It looks all very weird and very inconsistent. And take a look at the actual logos. Like, what are you thinking when you see these color palettes on the words? The color of the flowers looks a bit like dirt, I guess, but it also looks a bit like something else. And the paintball being pink, I'm not really sure who their target audience is. But take a look at this. If we flip the color palette, it suddenly all looks like it's meant to be like this. It suddenly all looks a lot better, right? It looks consistent with the actual message. So when you're picking colors, you have to be aware of the mood of your color palette. So the predominant color that is going to be in your design really tells a story and it conveys a message to the user. For example, red conveys love, energy, intensity, which is why you see a lot of car adverts which have a red car on a red background. It's because they're trying to tell you, hey, buy this car and you'll feel energetic and the intensity of this car, even if you're 89. Now, yellow is more about joy, intellect, attention. And the most important thing about yellow, though, is how attention-grabbing it is, because it's almost impossible to not look at something that is very yellow. For example, this ad. Now, a few years back, this ad caused an uproar because it has this lady in a yellow bikini and it says, "Are you beach body ready?" And a lot of people got really, really upset about it. They took to the internet, they raved about it. And I remember thinking to myself at the time, you know, this is not so different from a lot of the other ads that are trying to tell women how to look. And it's not a great message, but why is it causing so much anger and causing so much attention drawn to it? And I think the reason is because it's actually bright yellow. It's impossible to ignore this advert when you come across it. So when you're creating a logo or when you're creating some sort of headline, then yeah, yellow is a great choice. But when you're creating something that's designed to be looked at for a long period of time, then yellow can be too attention grabbing. It might actually hurt your user's eyes if you try to read a whole article that's backgrounded in yellow. Now, the next color that we're going to talk about is green, which is all about freshness, growth, safety. And that's why you see a lot of grocery companies like HelloFresh or Amazon Groceries use this color as their predominant color palette, because it's trying to tell you, hey, look, this thing is edible. This is what we're selling. And so if you have a company that has anything to do with food, this is usually a safe bet to go with. Now, blue is about stability, trust, serenity. And so you see a lot of companies which need to convey that, hey, we're really trustworthy. Use this color. For example, look at all the financial companies. Look at companies like PayPal or the cryptocurrency companies like Coinbase. They all choose this color because they want you to know that they're not going to run away with your money. In fact, there was a really interesting psychology study where they compared interviewees wearing different colored shirts. So for example, a group of them would wear a green shirt, another group would wear a blue shirt, and they compared how they were perceived by the interviewers. And it showed that just by changing the color of your shirt to a blue one, you vastly increase the amount of trust in you that's given by other people. So have a think about that the next time you're going for an interview. Now the final color is purple, and it's meant to signify royalty, wealth, femininity. And strangely enough, I've come across a number of payday loan companies which use this color palette, especially ones which are targeted at women. So the important thing to think about is that you're making a conscious decision when you're choosing a color palette. It's not just whichever color you like or your favorite color, but it's actually what message am I trying to convey to the user, and then picking an appropriate color. Now, usually you're not just going to be using a single color for your design. You're probably going to be using 2 or 3. So at some point you have to think about which different colors to combine. And this is probably the most scientific part of color theory. Now, very often designers will rely on scientific ways of combining colors. For example, taking 2 colors that are right next to each other on the color wheel. And this way you create what's called an analogous color palette. And these designs look incredibly harmonious and they really work well together. So this color palette can be really good for things like navigation bars and the body of your website, or things like a logo and its background. Now, what it's not so good at though is standing out. If you really want your design to pop, you're better off taking two colors from opposite ends of the color wheel, creating what's called a complementary color palette or a clashing palette. Now, this complementary color palette really creates that pop, and it really brings out each of the colors. So the next time you go to a supermarket, I want you to take a look at the meat aisle and see if they've used this complementary color palette to make things pop. So one of the things that you often see is they'll take these fake plastic bits of greenery, like fake grass or fake bushes, and they'll put it in between the meat. And because the green and the red are complementary colors, it makes the red meats pop out a lot more and gives you this idea of freshness, even if it's, a little bit past the best date. But what you shouldn't do with clashing colors or complementary colors is to try to style text and text background with it, because it actually looks very, very jarring. And you can feel your eyes sort of getting a little bit fuzzy looking at this particular combination. So don't do this when it concerns text. Instead, keep it to things like logos or icons or things that you really, really want to stand out from each other. Now, there's a lot of other ways that you can combine colors, like drawing an equilateral triangle to create a triadic color palette, or drawing a perfect square. Now, if you want to, you can head over to a website called Adobe Color, which lets you mess around with all of these different color combinations. So select a triadic color palette or a square color palette, and then drag it around the color wheel so that you get different combinations of colors. And once you come across a palette that fits the mood of your project, then you can pick the hex codes and just put them straight into your website. Now, if all of that sounded like it was a little bit too much work, then I got you covered. You can also use a website called colorhunt.co. This is a website where professional designers have curated some of their favorite color palettes, and you can nab the hex codes straight off the website. So take a look at the hot and popular sections of this website and use it to guide the palette scheme for your next project. Now, when you create a website that has a beautiful, consistent color scheme, like the one for the Liebe yogurt, you can see how much it makes the design stand out, and it becomes really colorful and really playful, and you can convey different messages using your choice of colors and your color scheme. So think about your color choice and your color palette the next time you design your website, to make sure that it's consistent with what your brand is about and what your product is about, and it conveys the message you want to convey. All right, the next topic I want to talk about is typography. Now, I know a lot of students always say to me, but why do I need to learn about typography? I just open up Word, click the drop down, find Times New Roman, my favorite font, and then just put that on everything. It's done, right? Well, let's think about this. Now, let's say it's Valentine's Day and you decide that you want to write a letter to your beloved Valentine, and you change the font to something cursive like this. You'll always be mine. I don't know if she or he will be, but you have a good chance. Now, let's say that you chose the wrong font. That's a bit of a problem. Not only do I not think your Valentine is going to take very kindly to this, you might also have the police on your back, which is a bit of a problem. So fonts really do matter, and it's important to consider not only their mood, but also how to combine different fonts. And it's a really, really easy way to make your designs look very professional and really slick. Out of all of the fonts in the world, there's pretty much two large families that you should really know about. One is the serif family, where they have these little feet at the end of their central beams. And the reason why they have these little feet is because the serif typeface were inspired by the marble carvings of days of yore. So if you next go out and you take a look at the buildings around you, especially if you're in a historical area, take a look at places where they've carved into stone or marble. And you'll notice that they also have these little feet at the end of the central beams. So why is that? I don't know how many of you carve marble in your spare time, but if you did, you would know that once your chisel has gone into the rock and you need to exit your engraving, it's actually not possible to create 90-degree angles when you're carving into rock. So this is where the serif typeface gets their inspiration from. And this is also the reason why when you're choosing a serif typeface, you're making your design look more serious, more authoritative, and also a little bit older as well. So it's really good if you're designing something like a letterhead for a legal company or a magazine for architectural design. But when we take a look at the big family of serif typefaces, they're actually further subdivided into smaller subfamilies like old style, transitional, modern, and slab serif. Now, the really interesting thing is you can actually tell how old a typeface would look by looking at the difference between the thickest and the thinnest parts of each letter. So compare the old style O versus the transitional O versus the modern O, and look at how that difference between the thickest part of the letter and the thinnest part gets more and more exaggerated as you get towards a more modern font. So if you want something that looks authoritative but modern, then maybe you want to go for a modern serif typeface like Didot. But if you wanted to come across as a little bit older, a little bit more aged, maybe you have a winery, maybe you want to go for an old style serif instead. Now, just as different colors have different moods and emotions, different fonts also have different moods, and they also convey a different message to a user, depending on which one you choose. So the serif family generally come across as traditional, stable, respectable, authoritative. These are the words that get thrown around by designers when they're thinking about the serif typeface. So, for example, the next time you go to a magazine rack, pick up the Vogue magazine, take a look at their title and see how it's a modern serif typeface. It's got hugely exaggerated difference between the thick and thin parts of the lettering, and it looks authoritative and it knows what it's talking about. Now, on the other hand, if we think about the sans serifs, they're kind of a different family, because instead of having the serifs or the little feet at the end of the central beams, they have perfect right angles. And it's this right angle that makes the sans serif family look so much more friendly, more approachable, more novel and more contemporary. So, for example, you will tend to get words like sensible, simple, straightforward. And this is why a lot of startups love using the sans serif typeface in their websites. For example, a humanist typeface, which is a subfamily of the sans serifs, is something that is known as a highly readable typeface. And in fact, even within the serif and the sans serifs, you'll tend to see designers going for the sans serifs if they want to write body text, which needs to be more legible and more readable. Now, within this subfamily, there's even differences in terms of legibility and readability. So how easy are the words to read, and how pleasant is it to read the letters? There was a really interesting study done by MIT a few years back, where they took two groups of users. One, they put them into a car which had a dashboard made of a humanist typeface. And the other car had a dashboard which had a grotesque sans serif typeface. And what they did is they tracked the pupils of the people who were driving the cars. And they tested how long each driver needed to look down at the dashboard before they got enough information from the speedometer or the odometer, and before they could come back and look at the road again. And really surprisingly, they found that just by changing the font from a grotesque sans serif to a humanist sans serif, they could save the drivers somewhere around 30 to 40% of the time that's required to understand the information. So imagine if that car is on a freeway that's driving at 60 miles, 100 miles an hour. That difference in the amount of time the user needs to look down at the dashboard could be the difference between life and death. And as designers, we rarely get to make that kind of difference in the world, right? So knowing that the Humanist typeface, all of the fonts that belong in that category, like Gill Sans, Tahoma, Verdana, these are highly readable and highly legible fonts, which you can use in the body text, for example, of your sales pitch. Now, even though we're not saving lives with our sales pitches, if you manage to get the user to read through more of your sales copy, then they're probably going to be more convinced and more likely to buy your product, right? So readability and legibility when you're choosing fonts is incredibly important. And the things that you're looking for in the letters when you're looking for legibility are open shapes and a lot of space between each of the letters. And also the forms look unambiguous, so they look different. For example, here the G and the 9 actually look different on the second line. And finally, varying proportions. So having an O that's very wide and a 0 that's a bit more narrow, so you can actually tell the difference between the two. Now, while we've talked about using fonts, it's often that you see people go a bit overboard, where they choose 10 fonts in the same design. And that makes your design look very cluttered and very unprofessional. I recommend actually sticking to just 2 fonts in one design. So if you're making a poster, keeping that to 2 fonts. If you're making a section of your website, keeping that again to 2 fonts. It just looks a lot cleaner and a lot tighter. And when you're combining these 2 different fonts, you want to try to go for similar moods. So find fonts that have a similar mood to each other and also a similar time era. You don't want something that looks ultra modern with something that looks like it's from the days of yore combined together. It looks a little bit weird. Now, the things you want to contrast are the serifness. So for example, you want the heading to be a serif and the body to be a sans serif, or the opposite way round. It just creates more interest in your design. And similarly, you can also create interest by just changing up the weights between the heading and the body. So making the heading really, really bold, or even using a black typeface, and making the body text using something like thin or regular or light. These different weights can create contrast in your design. Now, if you don't remember anything from this talk on typefaces, I just want you to look at these 6 fonts and try to wipe them from your memory, because it is very, very difficult to make these designs look good. Unless, I guess, if you're running a lemonade stand. But if you want to look professional, if you want to look designed, try to use one of the other fonts that we've talked about and try to ignore these ones which are difficult to read and have moods that are difficult to fit in a professional setting. The next time you're designing a website, think about what typefaces you're going to choose. Think about what you're trying to convey with those typefaces, and then pick a font from the sans serif or the serif family. And maybe try to combine them so you have a heading that's a sans serif and a body that's a serif, and try to create contrast in your designs. So keep this in mind, and hopefully that will make your designs a lot more interesting and a lot more professional. So now that we've talked about some of the fundamentals of design, like color theory and typography, the next thing I want to talk about is user interface design. Now take a look at this picture. In most cases, 99% of you would have read "your eyes here" first, then here, then "isn't that fascinating?" So this is just a way that our brains work. We're always drawn to the bigger, bolder, squarer things. And as designers, we can use this knowledge to define hierarchy. So let's say that you were to write a birthday invite to Jane. You could write it like this, but all of the information has equal weighting. So as a reader, I have to go through the entire paragraph and I can't just skim through it to get the important bits. So it's going to take me a lot longer, right? Now, on the other hand, if I apply the rules of hierarchy, then the most important information gets conveyed over first, and I make sure that Jane actually knows whose birthday party it is, where it is, and when they should go. So we can establish hierarchy in a number of ways. The most obvious is through the use of color. So colors that really pop and stand out and have contrast with their background tend to be used for high hierarchy. So for example, in this case, if all the colors were the same, then it feels like they all have equal importance. But on the other hand, if we have something that's very bright, very standout-ish versus something that's a bit more grayed, a bit more muted, then we know exactly where our eyes will go to first. Now, if you take a look at this example, this is the ASOS website, and their predominant color palette is this sort of gray and white color. But they've really cleverly used their accent tone, this green and red, to really tell the user what they think you should really look at. And it seems like ASOS really cares that you know that they have an outlet and also that you add your product to the bag so that they can actually make money off you. So in this case, they're using that green accent tone to really pull the eyes to that button and make sure that the user actually completes their transaction. Now, in addition to color, you should also think about size, because as I said, the bigger items often draw your eyes to it. So for example, if you look at the Coinbase website, which you can use to buy cryptocurrency, we can see the first thing they want to tell you is you can use this website to buy and sell cryptocurrency. Now, the next biggest thing on the page is this huge email input and a button that says get started. So because a lot of these companies run ads and they're paying for users to land on their page, it's really important for them to capture the emails. This is kind of what this design is representing, right? As long as you land on this page, you're probably going to want to look at this place where you put in your email address and get started so that the company can capture your information. Now, in addition to establishing hierarchy, in terms of user interface, you should think about the layout of your website. You can, of course, on one hand, have this big block of text, which is just your website, where everything is all laid out in the same kind of way, or you can create more interest by creating a block of text and then interspersed with pictures, and then create some different sizes, some different shapes, and different hierarchies to make your design look more interesting. Now, the Wikipedia pages are an example in bad design, because just look at how bland it looks. It really is trying to be an encyclopedia, but it doesn't have to be like this. Now, one of the most noticeable things about Wikipedia is just the length of each block of text. Just look at how long each line of text is. It's very hard for a user to keep their eyes tracking along the same line. And in fact, in terms of user interface design, there's an optimal line length. Too long and it gets a little bit tedious to read, but too short, it feels a bit too choppy and it's a bit awkward to read. So you want to aim for something around 40 to 60 characters per line so that it feels comfortable to the user and they'll be able to get through the information and still be interested in your website. Now, when you have good layout like Grammarly's website, it's not only interesting, but it also chops up the content into smaller pieces so that you actually get through more of the website and you take more of it in. Now, another thing I want to talk about is alignment. This is to do with how you position each of the elements on the screen relative to each other. So take a look at the example on the left. The top title is center aligned, whereas the body text is left aligned. And it makes it look a little bit awkward, like they're not really meant to be together. Now on the right, however, just by shifting the alignment so that both starting points are the same for the title and the body, it suddenly looks a lot more consistent and a lot more designed. Now, one of the easiest ways of making any sort of design you create look professional is just to reduce the number of alignment points. So let's say that you're creating a slide deck for your next presentation, or you're creating a poster for your birthday party. Take a look at all the things that are on the design and identify a line which goes through the beginning of each item. Now, if you can reduce the number of lines like we have done here on the right, then suddenly the design looks a lot more coherent, like all the pieces are meant to be together, and it just looks a lot more professional. So use these grid lines in your design to help you. Visualize where the starting points of each element is and try to line them all up. Because even if you do nothing else but just alignment, you can see in this case the left looks a lot more sloppy and the right looks a lot more designed and more professional. And all that's changed. There's no change in the color, there's no change in the typography, it's just the alignment. Now, a really important concept in all design is white space. And white space refers to the empty space that's around text or around your elements. Now, sometimes when I'm on the high street, I come across one of these luxury handbag or shoe shops, and I look through the window. Now, here's an experiment. Take a look at this shop that sells handbags, and take a look at this one. Now, how much are you willing to pay for a handbag from this shop versus this one? Now, this is really a use case for white space. A lot of luxury shops, luxury designer stores, one of their simplest tools is just injecting white space around their products, space things out, and it makes everything suddenly look a lot more expensive. Whereas when you have everything all tightly crammed together and you have a lot of product on show, it makes it look like it's some sort of discount store. And this same principle applies when it comes to digital design as well. Let's say you have an ad for noise cancelling headphones. If you have loads of things on screen, there's new, only $20, 100% noise cancellation, it makes the product look really cheap. Whereas if you injected some white space, all of a sudden it looks like Apple made it, right? Just by adding that space around each element on the screen, you can make your design a lot more minimalist and at the same time elevated. Now, the last thing on user interface design I want to talk about, and probably the most important, is design for your audience. A lot of things that I've said, including not using Comic Sans, it really depends on your audience. Let's say you're designing a children's concert poster. The one on the right looks like something that children might actually want to go to. The one on the left looks a bit like a funeral advertisement. It's so serious, it's so black and white, and it's so severe looking that no child is gonna want to go to that concert. So think about your audience. Think about what would appeal to them and what's important to convey to them. That it's going to be a fun concert, or that it's going to be boring adults who are going to be reading newspapers and there's some sort of classical band in the background. When you're designing websites, design it for your audience. Even if it's something a little bit messier, a little bit bolder in terms of color, as long as it fits your audience, then that's perfectly fine. So have the flexibility in your design so that you're not just creating one style all the time. You're creating one style for a particular audience, like teenagers who want to buy clothes, and you're creating a different style for people who want to buy and sell cryptocurrency or have a medical website. So the flexibility in your design skills is really important when it comes to user interface design. But keep in mind those 5 things: hierarchy, layout, alignment, white space, and your audience. And you'll be well onto the way to creating more beautiful user interfaces for your websites. Now, so far, we've talked about the 3 pillars of web design: color theory, typography, user interface design, and now I want to talk about the last pillar, user experience design. Now, a lot of people often get confused about what exactly is UX or user experience. And one of the best ways I've heard it explained is through the story of the renovation of a college. So this is a picture of Reed College in the US, and let's just use it as our imaginary backdrop. So this college decided that it needed to undergo serious renovation, tearing down the buildings, building new ones, and completely reform the campus. So they invited this well-known architect who was very respected in his field. He came and he did a great job with all the buildings, and the provost was really happy. He was like, this looks great. But he had one question. Hey, Mr. Architect, it seemed like you've just left lawn across the entire campus. Where are all the paths that people are going to walk on to get between the buildings? At this point, the architect says, don't worry, I'll come back in a year and all will be revealed. So in a year, the paths where people need to naturally walk becomes trodden down and the grass gets worn down, revealing these paths that people need. And it's at this point when the architect actually lays down all the tiles and paves these paths. So this is kind of the difference between user experience and design. Design, we often think of having an aesthetic, what we think looks good, and enforcing that on the user. Now, user experience is meant to be invisible. If you have a good experience with a website, it's meant to be unobtrusive and it just lets you do your thing. And it feels like as if everything is easy and everything is effortless. So this is what we're aiming for. And in order to do that, we have to think about, again, 5 things. The first is simplicity. Keeping things simple is always better than making it more complex or more cluttered. So this is a website called Sina, and it's one of the biggest news websites in China. Now, every time I look at it though, I get a headache because it is just so dense. There are so many links and my brain gets overwhelmed and I say, nope, can't do it. So take a look at this alternative. This is Monocle, which is also a news website. But look at how they've managed to chop up the content, provide some interest for the eyes. There's a little bit of dialogue, some images, some videos, a little bit of text. It's never overwhelming. And with that consistent color scheme and typography, it's really delightful to actually read, rather than this experience of sort of hurting your eyes with design. This is a much nicer user experience because it's simple. So whenever you're having to choose, should I make it more complex or should I make it more simple? Always try to pare it down. The second point is consistency. Keep your designs consistent, but also keep the functionality of your product consistent. So here's an example. This is the web page for Xfinity. Xfinity is a really big communications company in the US. And they are responsible for various things like providing TV and providing internet. Here are 3 screenshots from various parts of their website. One is their homepage, the second is their TV offerings, and the last one is their news site. And if you take a look at the top navigation bar, not only do you see that they've changed up the design of the navigation bar between the different parts of their website, they also made it work a little bit differently. The buttons are not all in the same place, the search bar moves around, and that inconsistency means that a user is going to be confused when they go from one part of the website to another, having to relearn how to use your website. If you think about the target audience of this company, Xfinity, a lot of them are going to be a little bit older, right? And having this inconsistent functionality and inconsistent design will really make those users have a bad experience with this website. Now, the next thing to think about when you're designing your website is to take into account people's reading patterns. Now, they've looked at how human eyes track a web page and which parts they look at when they're browsing. And one of the most common reading patterns is what's called the F pattern, where the eye starts at the top left of the corner and then it tracks to the right and then it flips back again, browsing down the left gutter. So you have often things like bullet points or pictures or icons, buttons, they're all on the left. So you can design for this by using the F layout. So have the most important parts of your content on the left gutter. Have the logo at the top and have everything follow this pattern. For example, like this website for BigCommerce. See how the eye is being naturally accommodated going from left to right. Now, another really common pattern for reading is the Z pattern, where our eyes go from left to right and then zigzagging down all the way the website. Now, this of course depends on the type of website. So if you have something that's more sparse with more video content, or if somebody is trying to browse a website a little bit faster, you see them using this layout. And this layout is used pretty famously in the Facebook website, using that Z pattern to accommodate for people's natural reading pattern. So have a think about this. Have a think about how people naturally looks at the page and place your content in that pattern to make it easier for people who are using your website. Now, in today's day and age, it's really important to think about all platform design. It's not enough anymore to just design a website that's meant to go onto a desktop computer. Instead, you have to think about mobile as well. So having a website that scales up nicely onto mobile, what we call mobile responsive, is really important. You don't want a big website that's designed to take up a landscape kind of screen to be crammed into a phone that's actually more like a portrait shape. This looks really bad and it's very hard to read the individual links, and more often than not, my finger's actually too big to tap onto the link that I want. So this is a really bad user experience. Now, this can happen the opposite way as well. So a design that looks much better on mobile, but then when it's rendered on a desktop with a wide kind of screen, it doesn't use up enough of the screen real estate. For example, this is the Facebook's latest redesign of their website. And you've got all of this empty space that's not being used at all, and everything's crammed into the middle. This is not very efficient. So have a think about how you're using the available space, and make sure that your website rearranges itself when it's being rendered on a portrait smaller screen versus a larger desktop screen. And try to avoid one of my pet peeves in terms of design, which is having so many banners on your website that show up on the mobile version that your content becomes impossibly small. And even when you're scrolling, it's like you're scrolling it on an Apple Watch or something. Whereas all of this extra content is taken up by warnings and banners and cookies, and it's just not a very good user experience. But on the other hand, don't go crazy either. Don't make your entire website just one part like a picture or a piece of text. Scaling it up massively like this is also very, very awkward, because then I have to just keep scrolling until forever before I can actually read and take in all of the content. So strike a happy medium, and most importantly, test, test, test. Give it to other users. You can employ professional testers to try out your website and give you feedback. Now, if you can't afford that, just use your family and friends and bake some cookies for them, get them to test out your website, and start getting some feedback on how you can improve the design. Now, finally, we've talked a lot about user experience and how to get people to have a good time. Now, some designers, though, use the knowledge they have about human psychology and user interface and user experience design to do bad things. And in the design world, we call these dark patterns. So patterns which get a user to perform an action or behavior that is beneficial to the company or the designer, but it's not necessarily what the user wants. And this, I would say, is another form of bad user experience. So let me give you some examples. This is a real life example. Let's say that you walked into Waitrose, which is a big supermarket in the UK, and you bought yourself a sandwich. Now, when you look at it, at the point when you're buying it, it looks like this sandwich is going to be full length from edge to edge, right? But then when you rip open the packaging, you're disappointed when you find that actually all that's in the middle is just air, and your sandwich turns out to be a lot smaller than you initially thought. It is the worst feeling in the world. This is a feeling that I can't stand when my food suddenly gets reduced in size. It's like as if somebody came along and took food out of your plate. In the digital world, people do the same thing, the same kind of trickery that's meant to get you to perform an action that you don't necessarily want, and you end up feeling really disappointed and really upset. With Amazon, every single time I have to re-click the free delivery button, which I've earned by buying so much product from them. But they still try to trick you using the things that we've learned about hierarchy, for example. Here, the button that makes them more money, Express Delivery, is highlighted in orange. It pops out a lot more. It's a lot more likely that you'll want to click on it. But in all likelihood, you are probably happy with just normal delivery, and you're now tricked into paying more for this delivery. Now here's another example that's actually truly evil. This is a Snapchat ad for some shoes. But what the designer has cleverly done on the advertising is they've placed a 1 pixel curved line on this ad, which makes it kind of look a bit like a hair is on your screen. But when you go onto that screen and you try to get rid of that piece of hair, well, you've tapped on it, haven't you? So the ad takes you to the website and the advertisers make money off each click. And this is truly a dark pattern because it's just tricking you to do something you didn't want to. Whereas good design is about helping people do what they want to do and giving them a good experience while they're at it. Now, the king of dark patterns is Ryanair. It's a low-cost airline in Europe, which is really known for sort of charging you for every single little thing. I wouldn't be surprised if tomorrow they suddenly charged you for using the toilet on the plane. But here's what the website looks like when you try to buy an airplane ticket. In order to buy your airplane ticket, you have to go through all of these extra add-ons, including saying, no, I don't want to buy travel insurance. But look at how they've hidden it inside this big drop-down list. And it's not even at the beginning of the list. It's actually sorted alphabetically below Denmark for some reason. And this just makes it so much harder for you to find that option and for you to actually accidentally end up buying travel insurance. Now, the final example, and probably one of the dark patterns that I dislike the most, is these checkboxes. You know, right below you filled in a form, you get these checkboxes, and sometimes the wording is so confusing that I really don't know what I'm signing up for. Like this one. If you would like us to no longer continue to stop not sending you special deals and offers every week, please indicate you are inclined to yes by not checking the box. I have no idea what clicking that box does. I really just, I don't know. I might click it, I might not. I don't know what it does. But it's horribly confusing and it's not a good user experience at all. I will bet you that after I sign up, I'm never going to come back to this website again, right? Are you with me? Now, we've seen what good websites look like. We've seen what bad websites look like. And we've even seen what evil websites look like. But it's time to put our knowledge to the test by designing our own website from scratch and applying these 4 pillars of web design to this project. So have a think about what you've learned so far and head over to the next lesson where we're going to design a hotel website from scratch. Now that we've learned about some of the principles of web design, such as color theory, typography, user interface design, and user experience design, the 4 pillars, it's time to apply what we've learned and build a design together. Now, there's a website called Daily UI, which gives you a task to design every day for 100 days. It's free to sign up, and it's something that really does improve designers' skills by just that repeated practice. Now, if you take a look at a website called Collect UI, you can see they've collected together all the designers' attempts at designing each of these daily challenges. And you can see examples what each of these challenges are. For example, anything from creating a sign-up screen to a flight website to a hotel booking website. So we're going to take some of these ideas as inspiration and create our own website design, applying the 4 pillars that we've learned in this module. The first thing I want you to do is head over to a website called canva.com. Now, this is an online graphics editing program, and you don't have to download anything, and it's completely free to sign up. So sign up for a new account and then go ahead and create a new design. So we're going to pick custom dimensions, and I'm going to choose 1400 pixels by 800 pixels high. Once we're inside our design, we're going to take this as the first screen that the user sees in our website. And then when they scroll down, they'll see the next page, and then they scroll down and see the final part of our website. So let's design the first title screen. Now I'm going to choose this free template, which gives me a backdrop already, but I'm actually just going to use it for some texture.
I quite like the way that this pattern looks. So I'm going to apply the pattern and then I'm going to change the background. Now, I think the background looks a little bit bland with just a single color. So I'm going to choose a photo instead. And I'm going to search for a beach like this one. So now that I've got my image, I'm going to drag it out so that it's sized as large as it needs to be. So going all the way to each of the edges. And then I'm going to reposition it so that it fills up the entire screen like this. So now I have a background image, some sort of texture on it, and I can go to the elements to keep adding to this design. Let's take a look at some of the gradients here. And I'm going to pick something that will fit in with this theme. Now, of course, how you design this is completely up to you. And I'm just providing an example of how I go through this process of designing. So now I've got a circle here. I'm going to add some more shapes, maybe a square of some sort. We can click on See All to see all the other ones. And then I'm going to put a square, which I'm going to make it so that it goes right to the end of each of the sides. So here, and then we're going to make it line up with the center of the circle, roughly, like this. And let's just change that color to white. Now we have this nice white border, some abstract shapes, some patterns, and an image. Now I'm going to add a heading text. This heading text is going to be the name of our hotel. After all, we're designing a website for this unknown hotel, which I'll call A Hotel. A really easy way of making something look authoritative and like it's been around forever is by changing the typeface to a serif typeface. So I'm going to highlight this font and I'm going to click the drop down and find a serif typeface like this one, Cardo. And notice how instantly our hotel looks a lot more established, like it's been around for longer. Now I'm going to change the color of this also to white. So notice how we're starting to establish a color palette of greens and turquoise and blue and white. And we're going to increase the font size to maybe something really large, like 120 or 144. And I'm going to change this so that it's all caps, like so. So that's actually a little bit too big. So let's drop it down a notch. And I can increase the spacing of the letters to, again, make it look more fancy, more expensive, and more authoritative. Here's the name of our hotel, A Hotel, centered in this box. And now I'm ready to add a subheading. And my subheading is going to be some sort of tagline, right? And I'm going to go with something really obnoxious, like lose yourself to find yourself. I feel like I'm ready to open a hotel tomorrow. Let's now contrast this serif typeface for the title with a sans serif sort of body or subtitle. And this is what we learned about in the typography section. It creates contrast in the design. So I'm going to pick this glacial indifference typeface, and I'm again going to choose white and then make both these lines left aligned so that I can align them to the same position. And notice how when you drag elements around on Canva, it automatically gives you these alignment grids so that you can more easily position it so that they are actually all aligned together. And notice how big a difference that looks, just having it off alignment and then on alignment. It suddenly just looks a lot more proper, right? Now I'm more or less done with my title page. I'm going to move on to the next one, which is going to be a page for selling the features of the hotel. Let's start off by adding some images. And I've got some that I've already found before. I've got a picture of a bedroom, which I'm going to make it a little bit smaller, like so. And then I've got a picture of a breakfast of some sort. So you've got food at this hotel. You're not going to starve. That's pretty important for people to know. And I'm going to size it so that it's actually the same size as the other one. So I'm just going to put it on top. Now, the last one is going to be a pool. So you've also got a pool, so you don't get bored. If it gets too hot, you can always just go into the pool. This is turning out to be a great hotel, by the way. I really want to stay here. Now, the goal of our features page is to have 3 images, which are probably going to be about the same size. So I'm actually going to need to crop this last photo so that I get rid of maybe a little bit of this right edge, but have it just about the same size as my other photos. And now I need to resize each of these photos so that it actually can fit onto this page. So I'm just going to throw them one on top of the other and resize them so they're all the same size. And now I can place them around this web page. So when you move towards the edge of each page, you can see this grid show up. So I'm going to line up the left with the left side of the grid, the right with the right side of the grid, and the middle right in the middle. So now these 3 are evenly spaced apart, and I can now add some more design features to it because it's looking a little bit bland just as photos. Now, one of the easiest things to make photos look nice is to just jazz it up with a frame. Now, because our hotel is very modern, it's contemporary, it's been featured in Vogue, I want to make sure that the framing also looks equally contemporary. So I'm going to find a circle, and I'm going to put this circle around this square image, which is going to make it look quite nice and contemporary. And then I'm going to give it a background color like that. And we've now framed our picture. So now all I have to do is just copy it and put it onto all the other images like so. And now I've got 3 features. You got a bed, you got food, you got pool. What more do you want? The next part is probably going to be some sort of explainer, right? So I'll add a subheading of these sections. And the subheading is going to be something like, you get beautiful food, you have beautiful rooms, and you have a beautiful pool. So 3 things that we've got. And I'm going to left align each of these again so that I can make it aligned with the left edge of each of the pictures, like this. So all 3 of these pieces of text are on the same horizontal level, and they're also vertically aligned with the start of each image. Now, each of these will need to be designed so that they have the same typeface as what we had in the title page, so that it's consistent, right? We're reflecting the same thing that we saw before. So I'm going to change that again to glacial indifference and do the same for all 3 bits of text. And now we can afford to increase the spacing in the text a little bit to make it look a little bit more roomy. So I think I had 18 on the other one, so I'm going to put 18 here as well, and 18 here as well. There we go. So we've got all 3 bits of text, and now all we need is just a little bit of body text. For the body text, I'm going to use a lorem ipsum. So I'm going to use one of these generators and just get some text generated, and I'm going to copy a little bit of it and put it into my design. Replace that text with this, and that's a little bit too much, so let's make it a bit smaller. And we're going to have some text which is going to go just below this section. So it's still a little bit too much. Let's get rid of the last sentence. That looks pretty good. Now, again, we want to keep our design consistent, so we're going to make sure it's, again, left aligned using the same font as before. And we've now got a bit of body text, which I'm going to further style by changing the color of each of these. So I want to go for maybe like a dark grayish, like one of these. And the same for the body text. That way it doesn't sort of stand out so much. And I'm going to copy this so that I put it on all of the other features. Notice the alignment here. I've got all the pictures aligned with each other, all of these circles center aligned with each picture. I've got all the text lined along the left, and this just makes the design look a lot tighter and a lot more consistent. And notice how with the layout, I've tried to keep it interesting by having some pictures that break up the text and making sure that each body of text is not overwhelming. It's not too long, like a big long sentence, but instead it's short enough to be easily read quickly. Now, the other thing you'll notice is that there's a degree of hierarchy that's being established here, right? Clearly, the thing that I really want people to know is that my hotel is called a hotel. But in addition, I've also got, beautiful food being more important than the body text that explains that paragraph, and each of these images also being more important because, let's face it, most people look at the pictures and don't read anything, right? So that's our second part of the website done. And we're now onto the last part, which is going to be the contact page. So this contact page, I'm again going to search for maybe a photo of something that's quite fashionable, contemporary, tropical. Maybe we can just find a picture of a pineapple. And this one looks pretty good. Let's go ahead and position this photo so that it's the same size as the design. And now I can move it up so that only the bottom shows up my pineapples. So there we go. We've got 1, 2, and 3. And the last part is just a contact me page. The contact me page is also going to need some title text. Let's just call that stay. So when they want to stay, they can take a look at this section. And we're going to again copy this style that we had from before so that we can actually replicate it down here. And we keep our design again consistent. It has the same theme, the same color palette, the same typography. This is a little bit too big though, so let's make it a bit smaller so it fits onto this page. And again, I'm going to be consistent with our geometric shapes, which is lending that sort of modern feel. I've got a sort of rectangle, a circle, more circles. So let's pick another shape from here. Maybe some sort of a hexagon. That looks pretty good. Let's add the hexagon, make it a bit smaller. We can maybe move our pineapples down a bit and change this so that it's white and make it even a bit smaller. I think something like that would do quite well. So now the final thing I want to add is some sort of mailing address, email address, phone number, which is going to go in here and it's going to be nicely aligned with this word stay. So let's go ahead and take this word and make it right aligned so that this line pops up when I try to align it like so. And let's just make sure that it actually still fits in. So maybe we have to move this text up a little bit, reduce the spacing a little. I think a lot of times you do have to play around with your design just so that it starts looking good to you. You might have to shift things a little bit and be flexible with those rules that we've talked about. So now all we need to make sure is that the word is right aligned and our text is also right aligned so that we can actually line them up together so that they actually look like they're on the same vertical alignment. Now, if we can just mess around with the size of the hexagon and make sure that everything is still within the hexagon, and we've pretty much finished our design now. What did that take? Maybe 20 minutes? And we managed to apply a lot of things that we've learned from user interface design or user experience design, color theory, and typography to create this 3-page, very modern looking website for a hotel. So at this point, there's a really cool feature in Canva which lets you just publish the website. So if you click on this publish button and you scroll all the way down and you click on website, then you can actually select the web style as standard and then open this as an actual web page. Notice how it's placed my 3 pages together into an actual web page, and I can scroll down and also navigate to it through the navigation bar. Now, of course, we don't have mobile optimization. We don't have any code that has any functionality. We can't add JavaScript to it. But at least we can quickly throw up a design, visualize it, and share it with other people to see what they think. And this is probably one of the best ways of building up your design muscle, just practicing again and again until you get to a point where pretty much unanimously everybody thinks that your design looks great and people start asking you to actually build websites for them. So study a lot of the websites that you come across, the ones that you think look really good, and think about what makes them good. And then try to take some of those aspects along with everything you've learned in these lessons to create designs that humans love. So I hope you'll take a moment now to pause the video and have a go at creating your own hotel website. So use the same tools that you saw me use on Canva and try to design a slightly different type of hotel. What if it had to be a more traditional hotel that, was around in the time of Henry VIII or something? It was like some really old hotel, and they want to show how decadent they are, how glamorous they are, and try to design a different type of website. So pause the video, give that a go, and then try to apply everything you've learned in this module into that design. And once you've created your design, share this link that you can see at the top of Canva so that we can all see your design and we can comment on how beautiful it looks. So have a go at doing that and make sure that you let us know what it looks like in the comments below and have fun doing it. Now, I hope you really enjoyed this module on web design. It's a little bit different from what you've been used to so far. There's no coding in this module, but instead we try to get you to think about all of the design principles that actually ends up creating beautiful websites that people will love. And hopefully you'll take these pillars and this knowledge through the next time you build your product or you build your website, and you'll apply it alongside with your code so that you have beautiful features and beautiful interface. Now, once you've created your own designs and you've shared it with us, then it's time to get back to the coding, and we're going to continue tackling more web development. So for all of that and more, I'll see you there.